Hi, I'm Darlene Carman, and welcome to the show. For 10 years, Mel Van Dusen produced 275 shows at KMVT, delving into creativity, spirituality, and near-death experience. He continues as an independent producer to explore near-death experience, interviewing over 100 people who have had near-death experience and nearly all of the researchers and experts in the field. And now is our time to interview him and uncover his latest findings. Hey, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Darlene. It's fun to be here.
I get the feeling that you're not going to stop your investigation until you find out what is death. I understand that people that have gone through the near-death experience just lose their fear of death. Do you find that so?
Yes. The problem is that people identify with the body. They think the body is who they are, and that if the body dies, consciousness goes also. What researchers in the field have found is that that's not true. Consciousness always exists, and that the body is just one way that we can navigate in this world until we die, and when we die, consciousness continues. So death is just a transition.
So, now, another common perception is that when people cross the other realm, that they don't want to come back. Now, has your investigation found out why this is so?
Well, if you identify with the body, you're going to be attached to it. When you separate from that, and you no longer identify with it, there's no point in coming back. And what's really kind of disturbing is that many of the people who pass beyond the boundary of life and have a glimpse of death, they realize that the attachments that they had in this world are gone. Even the people that they've loved, their kids, their husband, their dogs, whatever, that attachment is broken, so that when they come back, they often feel guilty that they had that experience, that they felt that they didn't really need those that they really loved. But one reason they don't want to go back is that all of a sudden their consciousness is enhanced. And it's enhanced to the point where they have an intense feeling for what it is to be loved, because they feel they are loved there. They feel they have that if they go back to life, that they need to express this love to people. That's part of their mission. But also they feel that death is really kind of a joke, because consciousness just continues, and that what they thought was really important, their life in the body, they realized that the life they had was really kind of a dream. In fact, it was a dream. And when they experienced this other world, they realized that that is really what is real. That's real. This world is not. And so when they have a clear realization of this, they don't want to come back because there's no point.
What about people that I've talked to that don't have any memory, one way or the other? And they seem a little bit frustrated because they don't have any memory. They don't really know what happened. What about them?
Oh, people who can't recall their near-death experience?
Yeah, they don't know anything. That they feel that they should have experienced something, but they don't have any memory of it.
What are you asking? Why is it that only about 10 or 20% of people have near-death experience and the others don't? Is that what you're asking?
Or remember that
Right.
they had the
Right.
experience.
Well, when you, let's say you have cardiac arrest. There's only a limited amount of time you have to bring people back. And so there's only a limited amount of time that you can have a near-death experience. And oftentimes when people have a glimpse of death, or their heart stops, or they flatline, and there's no oxygen going through the brain, they enter a period of void where there's just nothing there. There's no memory, there's nothing. And it takes a while before something happens. And if there's nothing there, there's nothing to remember, there's nothing to remember. And as to why 10 to 20% of the people don't have it, that's just one explanation.
Yeah, so many more mysteries. That's why you're
Right.
still investigating.
Right.
Now, I know that you personally did not have a near-death experience, but your mom did have an experience, and that aroused your interest in this subject. Can you tell us a little bit about your mom? What happened to her?
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, my mother told me that when she was 20, she was in the hospital, and she was in a brace. She broke her back, and so she was immobile for a very long time. And then she was diagnosed with tuberculosis. But it later turned out that she never had it. She had something called valley fever, which mimics tuberculosis. But she was in bed in the hospital in intense pain, and then she found herself out of her body on the ceiling. And she looked down at the body and realized that the pain was down there, but where she was, there was no pain whatsoever. And she wanted desperately to get back into it, but couldn't. And it was only until the morning that she found herself back in the body. And when she woke up, she told the doctor that what had happened. And he said, that sometimes happens to people. And, you should be lucky because we nearly lost you last night. So, as I became interested in this, what it really meant. And it was only about a year ago that Pim van Lommel, he's a cardiologist, who did a big study of bringing people back from cardiac arrest and questioning them about whether they had a period of consciousness. And he said, why is it that why are you involved in near-death experiences? Why do you do this? And he had a particular look in his eye, and I thought, what is he getting at? Does he know something I don't? And so I told him about my mother's experience and a few others. And he said, your mother had a near-death experience. It was not narrowly an out-of-body experience. Then I just suddenly realized, my mother nearly died that night. And she was on the ceiling all night. Out-of-body experiences are relatively short. I hadn't thought about that. My mother had a near-death experience. And then, as time went on, she had other spontaneous experiences that, she saw her father, her sister, and my father after they were dead. And I remember once I was talking with her, I was standing in the doorway of her room, and she pointed like that. She was a very alert woman, nothing wrong with her mind at that time. And she pointed that she saw my father right behind me, and I remember the expression on her face.
Wow.
And she had other experiences like this. My mother was not a New Age kind of person. She was a very practical, down-to-earth, and so
she didn't talk to you personally. You didn't have like conversations about her experience, right? She probably was kind of quiet about it.
She just brought it up one day. At that point, I think I was doing shows at KMVT about near-death experiences.
Oh, you were older then when she talked to you about it.
Yeah. She was getting a little bit sick, so I took care of her. Yeah. We had a neighbor who watched my shows, and my mother and her would talk about this near-death thing, and they were curious about it. And one day she had to go to the hospital for an abdominal aortic surgery. The surgery was successful, but she became paralyzed on one side and her kidneys failed. And she didn't want to be on dialysis, and she didn't want to live with paralyzed. So she decided to come home where she would just die, and so she didn't take any medication. And she called Mom and I over, and then when we were finished, I left, and she called Mom back. And she said, we've talked about this. There's any way that I can communicate with you from the other side, I will. I don't have a clue how I do it. And so my mother, a day or two later, she went into coma, and then she came out of it and said, I see Bob, that was her deceased husband, he's waiting for me. And the next day she passed away. So my mother waited a month, nothing happened, and then 2 months, and then 3 months. And she didn't tell me this until a year after it happened, but she said she was looking out the window at her friend's bedroom window, and she saw this sphere of light come out of it toward her, and in the sphere were all these other lights moving around. And then it drifted off to the side and disappeared. And apparently orb experiences are associated with manifestation of the soul.
Wow.
Does that answer your question?
That's pretty cool. I haven't heard about the orbs. That's new to me.
Yeah.
I-
Yeah, the soul is often viewed as a sphere of awareness.
So, what transpires between an out-of-death experience
Out-of-body experience?
and an out-of-body and near-death? Okay, we'll do it that way. Are they similar?
Well,
What's the difference?
out-of-body isn't dependent on your life being threatened.
Right.
That's basically it.
Right.
A near-death
That's the only difference?
a near-death experience is usually much more profound. Like an out-of-body experiencer will not see the light. He will not meet deceased relatives. He will not have a life review. He will not have an experience of wisdom, of infinite wisdom. They generally don't have the feeling that consciousness is eternal. So those are some of the main differences.
Sometimes I've heard of where people can have like an experience where they know of what's going to happen in the future, but where their body is, I don't know, but I would consider that to be an out-of-body experience.
Wait, they know what's going to happen in the future?
Yeah. What would you call that one?
Ugh.
That's-
I'd rather not go into it. No, it's kind of annoying for me. Many near-death experiences, they feel that they have enhanced intuitive abilities, and that can border on maybe even the psychic. And what I don't like is when some of these people come back and sell these talents. Some people go into business, they claim to be able to tell you X, Y, and Z, then you phone in and you pay the money for it. That, I think, is really dishonest. And you have to, I think, question these people, because one message you get from the other side is that you don't do that. You don't make money on what you've learned.
But what if it's from a child? A child that has had this experience. They don't have anything in mind, and maybe they don't even tell anybody.
Well, you can be naturally intuitive, and children often are,
I think so.
who have near-death experiences. They also outgrow their childhood long before it's necessary, because the experience causes them to mature so quickly. But you can have enhanced intuitive abilities, and children often do.
I think so. I think a lot of them do.
In fact, they often have enhanced intuitive abilities without even having a near-death experience. They can remember certain things that an adult will put them down for it. And so when they reach maybe the age of 6, those experiences are gone. They know that they shouldn't go there with them. And by the time puberty comes, these kind of experiences are just gone completely. The sex drive is too strong, and it drowns everything out.
Of all the people that you've interviewed with near-death experience, which one really calls out to you as being most profound?
Well, they're all profound. I mean, no, they really are.
Yeah.
But I remember I interviewed a woman named Beverly, and when Beverly was 20, she was Jewish, she was an atheist, she came from New York to stay in LA. She was on a motorcycle and she was thrown off of it onto the freeway. And she had concussion, numerous bones broken in her face and head. The skin was torn off of her face. And the doctors said, we don't see injuries like this except on the battlefield. But they put her together as best they could, and then they released her for home without much medication. Actually, she didn't have a home. She was just staying somewhere near Venice Beach, I think it was. And she said, I thought life was about having fun. It was about having pleasure. And no man would ever have me like this. So, God, if you're out there, just take me. There's nothing left for me here. So she threw herself on the bed. And the next thing she knew, she saw what she said was an angel on the ceiling that glowed from within. And she wondered, I don't even believe in this stuff, and I'm Jewish. Do we have angels? I don't remember hearing anything about that, and you know, her Jewish upbringing. But the angel took her by the hand, took her out the window toward the ocean, where she saw kind of a funnel, which was funneled upward. And she went through that. There was a pinpoint of light at the end, which became big when she got to the end of it. And she said there was the luminous presence of the being of light. And at this point, I was up with my camera, and I had my viewfinder like this, and I was watching her mostly on the viewfinder. And you know, her face was not quite right because of all the damage that had been done to it. But when she told me about what happens next, you know, I had to look again at the viewfinder because it seemed to light up somehow. It seemed to become bright. And then I looked at her, and at that point, her face was radiant. And she actually looked beautiful. She didn't look at all like she used to. And one funny thing about talking with near-death experiencers is that it's not that they remember the experience. Because if you were to remember it, you would have gaps. It would come out differently later on. They relive it. So when you're talking with someone who's had a near-death experience and they're telling you about it, they're reliving it right at that moment.
Wow.
And if you know, if you can just, you know, be with them and be sensitive to them, something can happen to you also. You know, you don't have a near-death experience, but you begin to feel what they feel. And I was beginning to feel what she felt. And she said that this being of light had all wisdom from all time, and all beings that ever were or will be were there with it. And it knew everything, and she asked it questions, and she had this, got this cosmic knowledge. And then she said something that many near-death experiencers say. It wasn't that she learned the knowledge, it's that she remembered it. So she had been here before. This was what she considered home. And then she said she was given a tour of the universe, and she went into a star which had an opening in it. She went through a void, and there was everyone that ever was or would be. And somehow she found herself back in her body. This all-pervasive, I don't know what you call it, this transcendental knowledge was gone. She found herself filled with light. And she said she went to college, and she found a tremendous letdown. It was a complete shutting down of her gifts and inner knowingness. So just being with this woman and listening to that, you know, it was it was transporting, to say the least.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. The experts that you've researched, are there any common grounds that they share?
Well, I talked with a woman who was an atheist, psychologist, and she was my house guest, actually. And she's, you know, very well known for refuting near-death experiences. And so I just asked her, what is the scientific evidence against near-death experience? You know, I was prepared to really be challenged. I was prepared to hear something I didn't already know, something.
Yeah, right.
And she said, asked her about enhanced consciousness, and she said, well, that's caused by random firing of the neurons in the brain. Random, chaotic firing of neurons in the brain? That is responsible for clarity and enhanced consciousness? No. No, that's not it. It's not anoxia, it's not lack of oxygen to the brain. That would lead to confusion. That would lead to a chaotic feeling, a feeling of unease. The experts who have positive things to say about the near-death experience, they will tell you that consciousness is not a product of the brain. And they will usually cite quantum physics as their source. I can't repeat really what they've told me because quantum physics is not so clear to me. But consciousness apparently is a non-local phenomena. Consciousness does not exist in any one place. It's everywhere and nowhere. And it's like a TV set. You know, the image is on the TV set, but it doesn't originate there. It originates from somewhere else. So the experts would tell you that consciousness is infinite and it's eternal. And when we die, we just leave the body, which is a kind of a receptor vehicle for consciousness, and we go on to something else.
You know, you went to India, and we have a little bit of a video. So can you tell us what we're going to see on this?
Yeah, a friend of mine, Jang, had a near-death experience. He had a heart and kidney transplant. He was almost about ready to die. During 12-hour surgery, something happened to him. He went in an atheist. He came out chanting hymns to Shiva in Sanskrit. He was from India. And so a year after he recovered, he had a near-death experience, a very profound one. He wanted to go back to India and ask, to be a wanderer, to ask questions. So I thought, that sounds exciting. I would like to go with you. So I went with him, and we went to the holy sites in northern India, and perhaps we can see that
So
now.
let's see what we have.
This is one of the burning ghats in India. This is the Manikarnika Ghat. Cremations have been going on here for 3,000 years, and the Hindus believe that bathing in the Ganges removes their sins. They believe the Ganges is pure, but they also know it's polluted. Here's the corpse that's floating in the river. Certain types of people are not burned, they're thrown in the river. There's a view of Varanasi. And then we talk to some holy men, to some sadhus. And they say that they've left their family and friends and to be wanderers and to seek mukti, or moksha, which is release from this world, to be in the heavenly abode with God. And this is Dharamsala, and we're going to see the Mahabodhi temple where the Buddha was enlightened. This is a descendant of the original Bodhi tree where Buddha was enlightened under.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And this was built in 300 BC by King Ashoka. It's been destroyed many times and restored. The last time it was restored was in the late 1800s. This is a very old statue of the Buddha in the temple. And this is MacLeod Ganj, Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama lives, at the foothills of the Himalayas. We talked to the Tibetan speaker of the house in exile.
You might also come out that those things will knock on your door.
And?
Well,
Let's see.
and we talked to Geshe Lakdor, who is the Dalai Lama's translator. I want to know how he felt about certain aspects of death. And this is the temple of the 17th Karmapa, who may take over from the Dalai Lama.
Beautiful.
Why is it that when people approach death, oftentimes their consciousness is enhanced? It is magnified. It becomes more clear. Why does that sometimes happen?
Because, as I said, when we are alive, especially, for example, when we are not sleeping in the day, we are using only the grosser consciousness, primarily the senses, eye sense consciousness, ear sense consciousness, the sense consciousnesses. You are not even giving much opportunity to the mental consciousness. Forget about using the subtle consciousness. But when you sleep, then you withdraw the sense consciousness. The mind becomes a little bit subtle, but it's just subtle and you're not able to use it, you're not able to practice it. But when you die, then you go into the, especially when you separate the mind from the body, then the mind that separates from the body is the subtlemost consciousness. So you're right in saying that it's enhanced, not in terms of like good or bad, but in terms of being able to see the actual potential of the mind. Because otherwise you are using only the grosser level, the surface level of the mind. But when you withdraw all the gross consciousnesses, then finally you are able to see face to face the subtlemost consciousness, which is almost like merging into the space.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it was a fun trip.
There's so much we could talk about, but I wanted to know, what are your thoughts about people who try to induce near-death experience with mind-altering drugs?
Well, a psychiatrist from New Mexico, Rick Strassman, wrote a book called DMT, the Spirit Molecule. He thinks that the substance DMT, which occurs naturally in the body, is released when we die, and that could be a cause for it.
DMT is a chemical?
It's a chemical.
Okay,
Yeah. It's also found in plants.
okay.
He since recounted that idea. He realizes it's not true, but it got me to being curious. DMT is also found in ayahuasca. You familiar with that? No. It's a drink from the Amazon. The shamans have been taking it for years, and people have incredible experiences on it.
Okay.
And in ancient times, people took substances to maybe bring on altered experiences. I was curious about this, and so I tried ayahuasca myself. And it certainly is a mind-altering substance.
You tried it?
Yeah. Yeah, I tried it. You should try it in a group of people. You need a container for it. It's that powerful.
Ooh.
You go through a barrier when you're on it. You know you will not remember what you're about to experience, and when you come out of it, you can't remember exactly what you experienced. But it definitely takes you, it's an experience that just doesn't happen in this world. You don't expect that. So it is a remarkable experience, and I can see why people think that DMT might be responsible for a near-death experience. But from what I know of near-death experience, it's nothing like that.
It's totally different.
Well, you'll see light on both of them, but the quality of the light is much different in a near-death experience. Both experiences are remarkable, but a near-death experience will cause you to become permanently changed in your life. An ayahuasca experience may, but probably not.
This subject is so fascinating.
Yeah, we've just hit the tip of the iceberg.
That
already.
is why you're never finished.
Right.
So thank you so much for being here. We're just really touching on the surface here. There's so much more to hear from Mel. And if you go to his website, you can find out how to get to the YouTubes to see his different topics. And keep watching, because I know he's not finished. He's going to go on and on and on. It's fascinating. I've watched some of these with some very famous people. Ron Moody, I think, was one.
Raymond Moody.
I'm sorry, Raymond Moody. Sorry, Raymond. And it's just fascinating. So keep learning about this topic. It's fascinating. Thanks for watching the show. Watch again.